The price is within the budget. The broad-shouldered, blonde-haired Swede smiled at me, taking a sip of beer. And the specs are just right, John, I reminded him, smiling back and taking a long sip of my beer. The only problem is the delivery, Neil, John noted, not for the first time. It might be worth adding. If you could speed up delivery by another month, there would be less risk of someone else taking over our market. Come on, John, I said, turning my smile into a wide grin. If we had delivered the damn thing a month earlier, you wouldn't be ready, would you? Maybe, maybe not. He continued to play with me, but it didn't bother me. The order was in my pocket, I knew it, and so did he. Only the Germans could match our specifications, and their price was exorbitant. The Chinese were a little cheaper, but will their plant work after installation? Maybe it will, but who will take the risk? No, our clients, Sonder and Glossy, will be the only ones with a working plant and will make good money from it. And John's full name is John Sonder. Yes, the order is in our pocket. My company's production was secured for another 2 years or more, and my income was about to skyrocket. Hell, I'll get 25% of my share when they sign the contract, and that's almost what I made last year. Not bad for a chemical engineer, huh? I'm a technician, and not even a real salesman. Great. How about another round, John? I asked him. To seal the deal, if you will. Okay, Neil, he laughed out loud. But you pay, okay? Bingo, damn it, bingo. I congratulated myself silently as I called the waitress to order 2 more mugs of Courage Directors, grinning to myself with joy. Gotten, I fucking did it. If you've ever been in this situation, you know what it feels like. Don't forget the starters, Neil, John reminded me, and for the 3rd time that evening I ordered 2 Scandinavian specialties to go with our pints. Aquavits, or were they Akavites, or maybe Aquavity. Damn, it was hard enough to drink the damn things, let alone write them. All I knew was that this colorless drink resembled real vodka, and its effect was like dynamite. 3 of these and 3 pints, and my head was starting to spin. Okay, John, let's finish these mugs and I'll have to go, and you have a meeting with Mr. Byrne Thomas for dinner tonight, I reminded him, the last couple of drinks seeming to slide down too easily. Jesus, Neil, John laughed. Doing business with your company is hard enough, let alone spending time with your boring old fart chairman. I'll pretend I didn't hear that, John. Pretend as much as you want, Neil, he smiled back. But you know it's true, don't you? No comment, I grinned conspiratorially in response. He was indeed a boring old fart, but to be fair, Mr. Thomas really knew his stuff. He wasn't really that old, but he still controlled 85% of the business. I'd rather you and I go into town and find a couple of pretty young English girls, Neil, John admitted. Not surprising, isn't it? I'm not sure what my wife would say to that, John, I joked in response. Oh, you British, John retorted, giving me a friendly slap on the shoulder. You're so much of a brat sometimes. What's wrong with a little fun once in a while? I just shrugged, not wanting to get involved in the conversation. Look at that girl over there, Neil, John said, drawing my attention to a young woman sitting at the bar 20 feet behind me. Look at her, Neil. Slender, brunette, maybe 26, alone and damn beautiful. Yes, you're right, I had to agree, surprised that I hadn't noticed her earlier. She's really cute, isn't she? Do you think she's in business, Neil? I don't think so, John, I replied. Doesn't seem like the type. You're probably right, Neil, John agreed with me thoughtfully. But I bet she's here looking for adventure. I raised my eyebrows at his excellent use of colloquial English and took the opportunity to look at the beautiful, slender woman while her attention was focused on some guy from town who just started talking to her. Beautiful, very beautiful. Her long, slender, tan legs were made even more prominent by the short, tight dress she wore, and the entire stretch of her smooth, graceful thigh was on full display, catching the eyes of many men in the area. Do you think she'll go with him, Neil? John asked me. Guess the lucky guy will have it later, huh? I shrugged and grinned at him. I hoped he wouldn't do this. In fact, I was married, but I still felt some jealousy. Well, she was an exceptionally beautiful dark-haired beauty with twinkling dark eyes that must have driven this guy from the city crazy. Well, if he's not going to, I'd like to, John laughed, his attention completely focused on the girl. Look at those pointy little breasts, Neil. She's definitely not wearing a bra, man. That guy is looking right into her cleavage. He should be able to see most of her breasts from where he's standing. If she bends over just a little bit more, she'll fall out of it. Dresses. He was right. Now I was jealous. She damn well knows it, John continued enthusiastically, turning in his seat to get a better look at her. See how she moved in her chair to give him a better view? He was right again. This sassy girl really did it. Now I was really very jealous. Not very big breasts, really, John, I commented, trying to somehow justify myself. Well, too. Damn, I don't know. The closer to the bone, the sweeter the meat. Isn't that one of your English proverbs, Neil? That's not the point, John, I insisted, growing increasingly sultry. Damn, this woman is married, actually. She has a wedding ring on her finger. Some poor guy is being scammed here. Damn, Neil, my Swedish colleague reacted with surprise. Don't be so serious, man. She's just a flirt getting along with a guy. After all, she hasn't slept with him yet. Not yet, I commented dryly. Not yet. I have never cheated on my wife Annie in our 5 years of marriage, or even before that. But looking at this sexy babe sitting at the bar with so many bare legs and God knows what else in sight, I could see how easily this could happen. As I said earlier, my English friend, John replied calmly, without taking his eyes off her. If he doesn't take her to his bed tonight, I'd be more than happy to. What about your dinner with Mr. Thomas? I joked, my eyes watering as I boldly downed the last of his Scandinavian hot potions. Maybe he'll settle down with a quick sandwich, John laughed in response. By then she might be gone with someone else, I pointed out. You're probably right, he admitted, or her husband will show up. With that, he shrugged, stood up with barely noticeable shakiness considering how much he had drunk, and with a handshake, reluctantly left the bar. I couldn't help but notice how the girl turned her head to look at him as he calmly walked out of the bar. So she noticed us, or at least him. It also became apparent that the guy from the city was not moving forward with the girl. She didn't ignore him or be rude, she just stopped laughing at his jokes. She was apparently tired of him. I thought I'd sit a little longer to see how long it took him to get the hint. Honestly, my head was so dizzy that staying seated was definitely the best option. It took about 5 minutes. The guy from the city must have become too insistent and put his hand on her bare thigh, but the girl immediately grabbed it and took it off, showing with all her appearance that he was wasting his time. Then, with a wave of his hands, he excused himself and left too, leaving me to wonder how long it would be before someone else took his place. Like this. Remember, I drank a lot that night. Deep breath, straighten tie, quick adjustment. At the bottom, you know what I mean. And I made up my mind. Hi, I began, sitting down in the chair next to her. Can I buy you a drink? I already have it, quickly she answered. The response is quick, but not too unfriendly. Do you come here often? I asked, trying not to laugh. Damn, I always wanted to use that overused line and never got the chance, but at least it made her smile. Who is your friend? She continued. Not exactly what I would like to hear. His name is John, I answered her. Swede. We just made a deal. Is that why you're late? She asked a little angrily. Is that why you're half drunk? I'm not late, Annie, I answered my beautiful wife. I sent you a message saying I'll be late. No, you didn't, Neil. I sat in the hall for 40 minutes, waiting for you. Check your phone, I suggested. I promise I sent it. She checked. I've posted. She apologized. I was half forgiven. I forgave him for being late, but not for being in such a drunken state. So this is the famous Swede you've been talking about all week? She teased. Why didn't you introduce me? You were too busy talking to Mr. City, I pointed out. We were taking bets on whether you'd leave with him. Annie laughed and shrugged her shoulders, treating me to the view that Mr. Tay's city had just enjoyed. John was right, of course, and he must have had a beautiful view of the space that opened up from under her light dress, leading to her left breast and beyond. My wife has always loved to flirt. This was in the order of things. That was one of the things I liked about her, and if I didn't like it, I wouldn't have married this woman. I carefully climbed off the stool, only to miss my foot and hit the bar. "You're drunk, Neil," Annie accused me. "How could you get so drunk when you were supposed to be taking me out tonight?" "Sonny awry," I heard myself say, swaying slightly. "Sorry. I meant to say sorry." "Ah, sorry, Annie," my wife helped me. "I think so. What a horror you allowed yourself." All I could do was smile back at her as my head spun around and around. "To be honest, I don't really want to spend the evening with you like this," she told me, and my head stopped spinning, but the room around me began to slowly spin. It was quite confusing. I didn't know what to say, but the call saved me. "Well, my friend," I heard from behind, "you're a dark horse." A huge smile appeared on my wife's face, and without even turning around, I knew John was back. "What happened to Johnson?" I asked, trying to focus on him as I turned around. "He did not come." "He's late," John said with a wave of his hand. "I rescheduled our meeting for breakfast tomorrow, so I thought I'd go back and see if this beautiful lady was still here." "John, this is Annie," I gave in with a sigh. "Annie, this is John." "Nice to meet you, Annie," he said smoothly, taking her slender hand in his bare paw and kissing the back of it. "Such a lovely name." Very continental. The kiss lasted a little longer than necessary. "It's my pleasure too, John," my wife replied in a whisper, turning to him as he sat down on the stool on the other side of her. Her silky dress pulled even higher over her graceful bare hips, and a welcome rip in the front of her dress moved towards him. "I was just asking this gentleman about you." "Sorry, this gentleman. Did you hear that right?" "Sorry," Annie said, turning halfway towards me, smiling at me from ear to ear. "I didn't catch your name." "Sorry. Now I definitely heard it correctly." I gained sobriety pretty quickly. "Neil," I blurted out without thinking. "My name is, Neil." "Hi, Neil," she greeted me. "Nice to meet you too." But that didn't stop her from turning back to John, thighs exposed and cleavage exposed and all. And so it went on. "What are you doing here in England? What is a lovely lady like you doing here alone? How long have you been here? I'm busy tonight, but maybe." Yes, I sat there like a fool, feeling excluded and humiliated, while my wife played a game of seduction with a Swede. He was completely unaware that it was my wife Annie who he was chatting with, and she was getting back at me for drinking too much. What to do? They flirted and giggled with each other, gazing into each other's eyes while I sat staring at Annie's back. It was a beautiful, slender back, and her dress fell so low that it confirmed the absence of a bra, although the front view made that much clearer. But it was still a back, and that's not what I wanted at all. Why did that Swedish idiot have to look into her cleavage, and I didn't? Like this, I knew she was only teasing me, but I was starting to get angry. She's gone too far. My head was still far from clear, but I clearly understood that she was taking revenge on me for drinking when I was supposed to be leading her in the evening. Then the same trash leaned over to pat John on the arm after he said something funny. John's eyes dropped a little and stayed there, his eyebrows raised slightly at the sight before him. The idiot was looking right into her cleavage, and although I couldn't see it from where I was, I knew that dress well and knew for a fact that he was looking at her bare breasts and everything. They weren't big, but what they had was almost perfect. Not the only hard thing, of course. The Swede did not try to hide what he was looking at, and Annie just as clearly made it clear that she knew it and did not mind. My stomach churned. Damn the order and bonus, it was too much. I usually liked it enough when she flirted a little and even showed a little skin sometimes. But this was different, when he extended his hand and deliberately placed it about halfway up her bare thigh. I had enough. When he left her there and she made no move to stop him, I had more than enough. "John," I exclaimed, louder than I intended, "shouldn't you have cleared up those specifications tonight?" "It can wait," John growled, his big, thick fingers drawing ever larger circles on the soft, smooth, bare skin of my wife's thigh. "Oh, I don't want to stop you from doing something important." Vimani finally hesitated, covering his hand with hers as his fingertips just started to touch the hem of her dress, just an inch or so from her panties. She stopped his advance further, but still did not try to remove his hand from where it ended up. "He's come further than Mr. City." "What do you say, Nigel?" she teased, looking over her shoulder at me. "Should John be here to work on his homework or stay and keep me company?" "It's Neil," I corrected her, controlling my anger. "My name is Neil and John has work to do, so we can sign an important contract tomorrow." I emphasized the word contract, so she knew it was important, besides the fact that I wanted his hand away from her thigh. "So is it true, John?" Annie addressed him in a girlish tone, deliberately leaning forward to give him an even better view down the front of her dress. "Is this contract with Nigel important?" "It's Neil," I almost screamed, although I don't know why. The cow knew my name. All John did was grin and nod in agreement. "You must be a really important person, John," Annie giggled playfully. "I just love powerful men." "Oh, what nonsense. Should we move to the corner there, Annie?" John suggested to my wife, pointing to the secluded corner where we had been sitting earlier. Annie glanced at me briefly, her eyes showing no recognition. "Of course, John," she answered finally, sliding seductively from her chair, her silky dress riding up even higher, revealing even more of her thighs and a brief but very clear flash of white panties. She accepted John's offered hand, smiled seductively at him, and allowed him to lead her to another table. "Order another round of drinks, my friend," John demanded without even looking at me. "Make my drink a double, please, Nigel," my wife cried as she was led away, John's arm sliding around her slender waist, threatening to move even lower. "It's not Nigel, it's Neil," I muttered through clenched teeth. "What is the point?" Nobody listened. Oh shit, no matter how sorry I was to drink so much. I ordered drinks and walked over to them, adding extra Scandinavian jungle juice to John's order in an attempt to dampen his potency. It didn't work. Never works, right? By the time I reached the corner, they were sitting next to each other, John's hand resting casually on her shoulder, his fingertips dangling dangerously, inches away from sliding down the slit of her dress. "Here's your drink, John," I announced, slamming it down on the table in front of him, glaring at my wife as I handed it to her. "Thanks, Nigel," she giggled, and they both burst into laughter at my expense. "Weren't you supposed to be meeting your wife tonight?" John demanded to know, clearly hinting that it was time for me to disappear and leave him to continue my courtship. "Looks like my wife has already found something to do this evening," I almost spat out, which obviously went over John's ears, but made Annie fuss at me with uncertainty. At this point, I decided to increase the pressure. I knew I should have told John the truth right then and there, and we could have maybe laughed about it, and even had dinner together or something. But constantly calling me Nigel and playing with him the way she did was more than I deserved for having a few more drinks. "And how the hell do you explain to your biggest ever client that the sexy little temptress flashing her bare breasts at him was actually your dear wife? God, how could she put me in such an impossible position?" "Take your time to leave," I continued, taking my place on Annie's other side and very firmly placing my hand about halfway up her bare thigh. "Do you think you can handle both of us?" I was sure that my move would frighten her, and Annie's surprised look confirmed that this was the last thing she expected. "Get out of this," I thought to myself as I looked straight at her, challenging her to find a quick solution to the predicament she had put us both in. And this is where things went horribly wrong, as John had no idea what was going on between the two of us. Me and John was not the type to hesitate. "How do you like it, Annie?" He laughed at her, and without wasting any time, the Swede moved even closer to his prey. His hand not only ended up on her chest, but slipped inside her dress. "Crap. Was it my fault? Annie screamed in surprise and stared at me with wide eyes, her shock as obvious as mine. We both sat paralyzed with shock, unable to even react, as John took her reaction as consent to his actions. I watched in horror as the big Swede reached deeper into her dress, cupping her bare breast and squeezing it. Wonderful, he purred, leaning down and kissing her neck. So soft and yet so resilient. John, I began to protest, although it came out more as a wheeze. I do not think that. Come on, Neil, he encouraged me. Don't disappoint the lady. Neil, Annie sobbed pleadingly, do something. Come on, Neil, John continued, completely misunderstanding her words. You heard her, she wants it desperately. With that, he slid the dress off her shoulder, and I fell silent as Annie's beautiful, small but full left breast slowly came into view. Amazing, stunned, the struggle, if there was one, left me, represented by one small bare breast on display for us, and anyone who might pass by to admire, and another being needed by the Swede. Then I realized that Annie had stopped protesting and had thrown her head back, her eyes tightly closed. What to do? I was lost, confused, angry, humiliated, defeated, outsmarted, excited. Excited? Even as I tried to understand the feeling, my hand spontaneously moved forward, the tips of my trembling fingers touching the very top of my wife's breast, causing me to jerk my hand away sharply as Annie jerked at my touch, letting out another loud sob. That's it, Neil, T. John laughed. She's delighted. Help me undress her a little. No, John, I tried to stop him, although my hand found its way back to caress her breast. This is not right. We can't. Only then did I notice that John's hand had left her breast and found its way under the light skirt of her dress, forcing my wife to spread her legs. God, John, I begged him desperately. We can't do this. It's not right. You're right, Neil, he answered me, to my relief, although it was short-lived. Let's get this nice young lady to my room before someone notices us and we get kicked out. The retort I was about to make was cut short when Annie opened those big dark eyes and held my gaze, her inner attraction shining brightly through them. How we got from there to the elevators is a little fuzzy in my memory, and since we got there with both Annie's breasts still on public display, how we even got there without obstruction, I really don't know. I was aware of the ding sound as the doors opened and two middle-aged men stepped out, stopping in their tracks, eyes glued to Annie's breasts. John pushed her inside, followed by me, still in a fog. Sorry, guys, John said to the two guys as they were about to get back into the elevator to join us, raising his huge paw to warn them. Private party, I'm afraid. The doors closed on two very disappointed businessmen as John dragged my nearly naked Annie down the fluffy, carpeted hallway. Don't forget her dress, Neil, John reminded me as he was halfway leading and halfway carrying my Annie to his room. As if I could forget this damn dress, I thought to myself, bending down to pick it up, although Annie seemed to have stopped worrying about such everyday things as John pulled her into his room. Those damned Oneski cards never worked for me the first time, but John opened the door and pulled them inside so quickly that it almost closed before I could grab it and follow them. I followed them straight through the living room of his exclusive suite and straight into his bedroom. Then I stood there and looked at them. Then he sat down and continued to watch. Watched them explore each other, when in fact it was mostly John's hands making the discoveries, while Annie made the sounds and sighs I knew so well. You're probably wondering how I felt watching them. Well, most likely empty, devoid of deep emotions. It was as if I was watching some disaster coming, but I couldn't do anything to prevent it. Too far, or too late, perhaps. Just sat there and waited for it to happen. I wonder if the captain of the Titanic felt this way. By then John had taken off his shirt and was trying to slide her panties down her thighs. John, honey, she told him eventually, when he began to show the first signs of irritation. The game, although fun, lasted longer than he would have liked. Give me a minute to cool down, please. You're not going to shut me out, are you? He demanded firmly, but keeping signs of anger to himself. I hope you're not one of those teases and dumpers. That's not it, John, I promise you, she answered in a hoarse voice. It's all happening so fast, and I'm all hot, and I need a few minutes to collect my thoughts. Then shall we make love? Maybe, probably, my wife answered with a slight uncertainty in her voice. I'm dying of thirst, John. Can I have something to drink? The other room is full of drinks, he informed her. What do you want? Something cool and long. I have something long right here in my pants, he joked, smiling at her. Something long, soft, and cold in a glass, please, she replied wittily. That sounds painful, he continued the joke, still smiling but standing up to get her a drink. Get Neil something while you're there, she asked John, acknowledging my presence for the first time since we left the bar. At least she didn't call me Nigel. Niall? John inquired in surprise, looking around and clearly showing that he had completely forgotten about my presence, asking what I wanted to drink. A cup of tea, please, John, Annie answered for me. He will drink tea. Tea, Neil? He looked at me with more surprise than anything else. Would you like a better beer? He'll be drinking tea, John, Annie beat me to it. If he's going to be driving soon, he doesn't need any more beer. Okay, Annie, he smiled at her, knowing that she expected me to leave soon. Then tea. Tea. Damn tea, I whispered to my wife angrily, finally realizing the situation we were in as the effects of too much beer and his damn vodka finally began to wear off. What is this story about me going home? What the hell are you up to, Annie? It will take him longer to cook, she informed me grandly. We need to talk and talk quickly, but this will give us a few more moments. I understand, I replied, calming down a little. But what the hell are you up to? Forget it, she waved my demands away. What's done is done, and we only have two options. One is to admit to him that I'm your wife, and that this is all a mistake. Can you do that, Neil? You could lose this order and possibly your job. Can we risk losing your job? And commissions, I muttered. Not easy. No, I don't think I want to do this. What's the other option? Quite simple, Neil, she smiled at me a little sadly. We're going for it, or rather, I'm going for it. I can't ask that of you, Annie, I exploded, forgetting for a moment that we were supposed to whisper. I can't force you to do this. Who said you have to force me? She asked, the fire flaring up again in her beautiful eyes. It won't be a difficult ordeal for me at all. Why don't you just say you've changed your mind? I suddenly suggested, realizing there was a third option. Tell him that you are carried away, but you cannot cheat on your husband and must go home to him. I can't do this, Neil. She looked at me sharply. That's not an option. Why not? I insisted. This is the best possible option. Okay, she replied calmly. That could be an option, but you rejected the first one, so I'm rejecting this one. You're kidding me, I blurted out in surprise. I'm dead serious, Neil, she countered. But he will expect you to give it to him, I reminded her, trying to keep my voice down. I think he will, she replied, trying but not quite keeping the smile on her face. We spent a few moments of our precious time looking at each other in silence. Maybe we should consider the first option, I finally spoke. Please don't do this, she begged, a look of desperation on her face. If I hadn't stopped him moments ago, he would have already taken me, and you wouldn't have stopped him, would you? It would be different, Annie, I argued. I was confused. Please, honey, she whispered, coming up to me, taking my hand and pressing it tightly to her elastic chest. Just this once, and I'll never ask again. It won't affect my love for you, I promise. I don't know, Annie. I'm confused, I blurted out, feeling the tension rising as we both heard the kettle boil in the next room. Please, honey, just say you agree. I beg you, just say yes. I can't, Annie, I almost sobbed in response in my confusion, wanting desperately to show my love and give her what she wanted so badly, but unable to bring myself to say it. Please, Neil, please, she begged. Just this once. Just tell me it's normal. That's too much to ask, Annie. If you're going to do it, then screw it, do it, but don't ask me to tell you it's okay. But you'll still love me, honey, won't you? I guess so. Yes, of course I will love you, Annie, I replied, my mind spinning from complete loss of control. Control which some deep alien feeling in my guts overwhelmed. Then prove it, Neil, she whispered. I wouldn't let him take my panties off, honey. I know, I groaned. I saw how you resisted. I want you to take them off with me, honey, she stunned me. Prove that you love me, honey. Take off my panties for John. I can't, Annie, I begged her, sweat dripping from my forehead, almost blinding me. Do it, damn it, both of you, but don't ask me to do it. Please, Neil, she sobbed. Help me. Here we are, John announced cheerfully, walking back into the bedroom. 1 tea, 1 cola, and beer for me. And, oh damn, oh shit, was directed, I believe, at me when he saw me pull Annie's panties down the last few inches to her ankles up to her ankles, and then held them while she carefully stepped out of them. I crumpled them up and put them in my pocket, realizing that they took up less space than the dress. I see Neil has done better than me, he remarked with ironic pain on his face. That doesn't mean you can't take advantage of it, Annie teased, turning to him. The pain soon disappeared as she laughed and took a couple steps towards him, throwing herself into his arms, nearly spilling the drinks he was trying to set down. He grabbed her and lifted her up as if she were a doll, first quickly kissing her breasts. He then roughly threw her onto the bed. If there had been more foreplay, everything could have ended differently. I could lose courage, or conversely, gain it. I could have stopped them, or even joined them. But John did not hesitate, took off the remaining clothes and grabbed Annie by the legs, pulling her towards him, and without further ado began to have sex with her. All I could do was sit there in silence, watching John give Annie the sex of her life, knowing that over the next 20 years of marriage, I would never be able to match it. Something she'll probably remember every time I tried. John had long forgotten about me, and Annie was too absorbed to remember that I existed. My presence was no longer required, so when I could no longer watch him turn my wife into a babbling, incoherent rag, I stood up, took one last sad look, and walked into the other room, closing the door behind me. Even there, I couldn't drown out the screams and screams from the bedroom. The best I could do was bury my head under the pillow, trying to block out the sounds and hold back the tears. Oh damn, what have I done? I don't remember how I fell asleep on the sofa, only eventually realizing that Annie's screams had been replaced by whispers. I eventually fell asleep, but was woken up some time later and heard another loud scream from the bedroom as they went at it again. Not as long this time, but no less painful as the third time when dawn came. What a terrible, fucking terrible night. After the third, fortunately shorter session ended, I lay there, feeling just as miserable, watching the sky outside the window slowly brightino. Eventually, I saw that there was no point in trying to sleep any longer, and I shook myself off and stood up from the couch, rubbing my eyes, either from sleep or from the remnants of my tears. The bedroom was silent, and I stood there, looking at the door, hating it, but unable to clear my mind of what I heard and saw. I wonder if I'll ever be able to erase these memories. I didn't need to do this, and I knew deep down that I shouldn't have done this, but I found the strength to quietly creep up to the damn door, slowly and carefully turning the handle. The sight inside turned my stomach, but it still took me a few minutes to tear myself away. They were both fast asleep. I closed the door to that stage and stood there wondering what the hell I could do, knowing that my nightmare from last night would only get worse if I stayed behind when they woke up. I couldn't face them, especially Annie. I ran away, leaving a hastily written note for John that I would see him later in the morning in the office. Not even the thought of signing that tempting contract could lift my spirits. I went home, showered, and changed, expecting to receive a call or at least a text from Annie at any minute. I didn't know what she could tell me. That she's okay, that she's coming home, that she's sorry, that she still loves me. I just didn't know, but it didn't matter because the call never came. It didn't help to think about why she didn't call, because the only answer I could find was that she was busy doing something else. I was given a hero's welcome in the office. News of the new contract had already reached old Thomas after his phone call with John the night before. I smiled and tried my best, claiming, not entirely falsely, that I had a bad hangover from my evening with John. Even odd Thomas, that arrogant old man, smiled and patted me on the back instead of reading Not Morality as he usually did. The morning passed, and there was still no news from John, which did not ease my suffering when suddenly news about him arrived. It was John Saunder on the phone, Neil, Thomas told me as he ran into my office. You had a fun time yesterday, I'll take it. We had a few drinks, I admitted warily, hoping John wasn't revealing too much. It's okay, Neil, your secret is safe with me, the old man assured me with a wink, dashing my hopes. Your young wife won't know anything about what you two did last night. I didn't do anything, I muttered, not knowing what else to say. Not like what Saunder just told me, he laughed heartily. It seems that the young woman you met yesterday was truly easy to reach. Her husband didn't show up for the date, so she let you both have fun with her. It wasn't like that, I began to defend myself, not knowing how to continue. That's exactly what it sounded like, he interrupted. No, I mumbled uncertainty. That's not true at all. About, Thomas looked at me thoughtfully. Are you saying that this girl was, well, a professional? If so, the company will cover the cost, so don't worry about it. No, that's not true either, I told him, and his relief was obvious. It was. She was. Oh, damn. John's version was probably correct. Where is he, by the way? He said he would be there later that day. My boss gave me pleasure by telling me this. Looks like the little one is tireless. I wore him out last night after you left and woke up this morning wanting more. After I left, I was surprised. It's okay, Neil, the old man grinned. I've told, your secret is safe with me. Your wife will never know what happened last night. You are sure? I asked sadly. Of course I'm sure, he chuckled. What could I say? Lunchtime arrived, but I couldn't bring myself to eat, and there was still no contact from Annie, and I sure as hell wasn't going to call her first. In the middle of the day, I was called into Thomas's office, and when I walked in, John was sitting there with a satisfied smile on his face. Neil, he greeted me. Where have you gone? We had so much fun. Why did you go away? You seem to have managed without me, I replied, forcing a smile. Absolutely, he laughed, slapping Thomas on the back, nearly knocking him over. God, Neil, I came this morning so you could give me a break. I've met a lot of hot women, but she just wore me out. Where is she now? I asked, trying to remain calm, while everything was boiling inside. Still at the hotel, the big Swede laughed, his eyes sparkling as he watched our reactions. She didn't seem to want to leave. But you said she was married, didn't you? Thomas asked. God be with him, with her husband. John laughed loudly. If he can't satisfy such a hot thing, then who am I to worry about it? What if he finds out? I interjected. So what if he finds out? John retorted. A stupid guy shouldn't let a hot girl like that walk around alone. I couldn't bring myself to make any comment and sat there with my lips pursed, trying to contain my anger, while Thomas, the old pervert, continued to tease John for even more explicit details, and the Swede was happy to provide them. Time passes, gentlemen. I was able to interject when I couldn't stand it any longer. Are we going to discuss this contract or not? Correct, my boss agreed. I have a draft here. Maybe we should go through it and make changes before getting lawyers involved. Okay, John agreed. I discussed it with my people before arriving, and there are a few things we need to clear up so that I can take it with me when I fly home tomorrow morning. The whole thing only took an hour or so, but somehow the euphoria of getting my biggest order approved just didn't come. There will be money eventually, but the pleasure remains limited. I'll go then, gentlemen, John announced as soon as the work was completed, in his somewhat old-fashioned English. I still have a baby waiting. Don't overdo it, John, Thomas warned him with a smile. You don't want to miss your flight. That's right. He grinned in response. You two want to come back with me to help me? I almost fainted. Besides everything else, Thomas knew my wife. Of course, we didn't move in the same social circles, but he met her a few times at corporate events. How would I explain this? I felt a rising panic, and it intensified when Thomas began to show interest. Oh yes, he was interested, and if John was serious, he would have gone. Not me, I almost shouted. After last night, I need to make peace with my wife. Not entirely true, but there was some truth in it. You're right, Neil, John interjected. You're both English and married, so I shouldn't tempt you. Thomas agreed with the Swede, but I didn't miss the angry look he gave me. With a smile on my face, I shook John's hand, told him I looked forward to his next visit in a couple of weeks, and walked him to the entrance to our office lobby to see him off. As soon as he left, I rushed back to the privacy of my office, grabbed my phone, and did what I swore I wouldn't do. I called Annie. However, this did me no good because the call went to voicemail. In desperation, I rummaged through my papers, quickly finding John's hotel details, urgently trying to contact Annie before John returned to her. The ultimatum was inevitable, and I was not going to back down. Some forgiveness might have been in order, but she had to leave this hotel right now. When the hotel answered, I asked to be connected to number 342, praying that I remembered the number correctly. Hi, is that you, John? After 3 rings, my loving wife answered. Will you be there soon? No, Annie, it's not John, I shouted into the phone. It's your damn husband. Why didn't you call me? What the hell happened to you last night? Oh, Neil, I'm so glad you called, she replied, but she seemed to have nothing to add to explain the reason for her joy. John is heading back to the hotel now, Annie, I continued, still annoyed. Get your things and come home. I can't, honey, she surprised me. You damn well should, I responded excitedly. If you don't come home within an hour, then our marriage is over. But I can't, Neil, she sobbed, and she seemed really upset. You know why I can't. I don't know anything, Annie. What's stopping you? Clothes, she sobbed quietly. Clothes, I shouted back. Yes, clothes, she whispered. I have no clothes. I can't go home naked. Where the hell is she? I demanded, but even when she said she didn't know, it suddenly dawned on me where she could be. All she wore last night was her light dress and even lighter panties, which were in my pocket where I put them last night. What about my jacket? She was at home where I dumped her when I came home to change. Crap. What should I do, Neil? Annie begged. What are you wearing right now? I asked in despair. Nothing, she replied. I've been naked all day. John doesn't have a shirt or anything that you could wear, I suggested a solution. I didn't think about it, she replied with relief. I'll go and look. She hung up and all was quiet as she no doubt went into the bedroom to comb through his things. I was starting to calm down and was congratulating myself on finding a solution when I heard the door slam, followed by John's loud voice asking where Annie was. Wow, this is how a guy likes a meeting when he returns after a hard day at the office. He was next to be heard laughing. Everything is unpacked and ready to go. There was no more talking, although I heard some disturbing noises. Then everything went silent when I heard the phone connection disconnect. Crap, I sat in my office, wondering what to do next. Should I call again, rush out there, and destroy it all, or just shoot myself? The latter seemed like a stupid idea because given my luck, I would probably miss. Although it seemed unlikely, I packed my things and headed home, just in case Annie was somehow headed there. As I thought, it was unlikely, and it turned out to be true. Annie did not return home that afternoon, and by midnight she was still missing. At that point, as far as I was concerned, our marriage was over. Brave words always sound like this. I honestly expected to wake up alone in the morning, but events proved me wrong. Lord only knows what time it was, but the sun was already up and leaking through the curtains when my brain started getting messages that something was happening. Annie had only woken me up like this twice in our marriage, and it took me a while for it to dawn on me that something very pleasant was happening to me. By the time my brain started to clear, I was already too far into it, and I may have made a mistake in allowing it to continue. My next possible mistake was that this was followed by 2 hours of non-stop sex, and when we were both rested, my mind was so confused that I could not push her away as she pressed herself warm and cozy against me. "Hey, sleepyhead," I heard as I opened my eyes to see Annie holding a cup of tea for me. "If you think this will excuse what you did, then you are sorely mistaken," I blurted back. "I didn't think it would help, honey," she smiled nervously at me. "We need to talk. Why don't you take a shower and I'll meet you downstairs in a little while?" That's how we started to rebuild our lives, or at least it started. At first, I didn't want to hear anything, which was probably no surprise to anyone, but she apologized with all her might, spoiled me, made promises, cooked me my favorite dishes, wore clothes that I liked, offered me seemingly endless sex, and told me she loved me so often that in the end, I believed her. She never really tried to explain what happened to her that night and the next day, and I didn't try to understand it either. Whether it was because I loved her or she was just so damn beautiful and sexy, I don't know, but gradually we returned to the relationship we had before. John Sonder returned to the UK for further negotiations twice over the next couple of months, and Annie never indicated she was aware of his presence, and I avoided going out drinking with him, which was what led to the problems in the first place. My settled, happy life collapsed on the third day of John's third visit. "Would you like a pint when we're done here, Neil?" he asked as we went over some blueprints for the plant we were planning to build for him. "Maybe just one," I replied, feeling like I really needed it. Still having problems at home from last time. "Good idea, Neil," he responded sympathetically, having no idea how central a figure he was to these issues. "Besides, I have a hot date tonight." "You're lucky. Who is she?" I asked. Maybe I shouldn't have asked that, although it didn't really matter anyway. "Remember Annie?" he continued with bravado. "Sexy babe we both, a few months ago. The one who loved to flash her breasts and who had such beautiful eyes." "I remember," I swallowed, without pointing out that I was not involved in what was happening. "So I called her every time I came back here," he continued. "She was tempted, but her husband was angry with her for not coming home all night, but eventually she gave in." "Are you seeing her tonight?" I asked in bewilderment. "She will come to my hotel." He smiled proudly at me. "If it's like the last time, I'll be out of shape tomorrow." "And her husband?" I asked pathetically, amazed at what he told me. "And what happened to him?" "It's not my problem," the Swede laughed. "If he can't hold her, that's his problem." "I think I should pass on this point," I told him. "I have things to do at home." We continued to work for a while, but decided to end it when it became clear that we were not making much progress, which is not surprising given the circumstances. And so I found myself back at square one, perhaps even a few steps back. On the way home, I wondered how Annie could think she could get away with this without being noticed. How could she think I wouldn't find out? The thought occurred to me that perhaps John had made it all up, but despite his boasting, he was not one for making things up. I had more or less thought through what I would say to Annie when I ran into her, and it wasn't pleasant, but the wind was knocked out of my sails when she opened the door for me as I walked down the path. "I guess he told you," she told me. "I thought he probably would." "Bitch," I barked at her. "How could you?" "Come in, honey. I have a lot to explain," she continued calmly. "It's not at all what you think." Then she kissed me. Yes, she kissed me, bitch. Only on the cheek, but it was so natural. "He knows," she said decisively, looking at me intently. "Of course he knows," I snorted in response. "He slept with you." "Not him, not John," Annie sighed with irritation. "I'm talking about that old bastard Johnson." "Johnson?" I exclaimed in amazement. "What the hell does he have to do with this?" "He found out, Neil," my wife continued. "I don't know how, but he found out that I was the dark-haired girl with whom John was engaged." "How?" I muttered. "How could he know?" "I don't know, Neil. But he found out, and now we're both trapped. Trap? What the hell trap? Yes, okay, I know. Quite pathetic. Sonder and Glossy backtracked a bit on signing the final order. Neil, my wife, who didn't even work for our company, sweetly informed me, complacently informing me who did. I didn't know, he was forced to admit. How do you know? Johnson told me, she continued. We met for lunch a few days ago while you were in Birmingham. He never admitted it, but it appears Johnson tried to squeeze a large amount of money into the deal. Not sure about the exact amount, but he tried to get them to pay him money into some offshore account as part of the deal, but John told him to fuck off. No wonder, I thought out loud. John and his company are tough guys, but pretty honest. I always knew Johnson was a schemer, but I didn't think he was that flawed. Whatever, Annie dismissed my boss's ethics in one fell swoop. If the deal falls through, we will lose the entire commission. That's a lot of money, Annie, but it's not the end of the world. What about double commission? What? Double commission, honey, she smiled happily. It's a fortune. You're confusing me, Annie, I replied, visibly softening at her story. It's simple, Neil, she continued as she rose. Johnson installed a camera in John's room. I'll spend the night there having sex with him, and tomorrow Johnson will show him the evidence. So, what is next? I asked, stunned by what I was hearing. We, or rather he, threatens John that if he refuses the deal, we will send evidence to his wife. Johnson is confident he will give in because his wife owns 80% of the company. Really? Was my dumbfounded answer. I didn't know this, and was amazed to find out that my wife knew. Yes, she continued. Her maiden name was Glost, and when they married, her family invested money to take John's little company internationally. Damn it, and you really think this will work? I asked, quietly reflecting on the fact that John had made it clear to me that he and his powerful wife had been enjoying an open marriage for the last 5 years or so, and she was well aware of his escapades abroad. Maybe, Annie answered less confidently. But even if not, what do we have to lose? So I'll let him have me again, and after last time it won't be hard for me, will it? Hardly, I agreed, although my thoughts clearly did not coincide with hers, to be honest. It will be fun, actually, Anne admitted, not with a smile, not noticing that my enthusiasm for this adventure did not in any way match hers. I'm really looking forward to it. I can imagine, I agreed, handing her the dress. You better wear this, Annie, because with what you're wearing right now, you'll freeze to death. Pretty revealing, isn't it? She laughed joyfully. Do you think he'll like it? I'm sure John will really like this, I assured her, although in fact the dress she wore hardly contained enough material to make one fall in love with it, although it revealed enough of my wife to give anyone a heart palpitation, who was nearby. See you later, Neil, she said over her shoulder as she walked elegantly down the driveway to our car, her hips swaying so sexy, only enhancing what I was about to lose. See you later, I whispered under my breath. Yes, much later. I sat that evening thinking about my marriage, or what my marriage was like. I always loved the way Annie flirted and teased, and yes, I loved knowing that she was giving random men a glimpse of something risque. But I always sincerely thought that she was faithful to me, but sitting there, I began to doubt. How easily she ended up in John's bed when I didn't act fast or smart enough to stop her. Those weird rumors and comments that I chose to ignore over the years. That time she disappeared for an hour or so at one of our company events, and Johnson, the old bastard, promoted me the next week. Last year on vacation, when she mysteriously got lost on the beach one evening and returned later with those beach guards who found her. Her older sister told me to keep an eye on her when we announced our engagement and didn't want to expand on the topic. Nothing concrete, and I had no proof before, but now I had everything I needed. What about John? It made me sick to my stomach to think that while I was sitting at home, he was probably manipulating my naked wife. But he wasn't really my problem, not really. Of course, he had sex with Annie knowing that she was someone's wife, but she was consenting, and he was free to do what he did. No, the problem was Annie and that bastard Johnson. They were the ones who passed me by. The question is, what the hell could I do about it? So you may be wondering why I found myself a few weeks later in a virtually unknown city of over 1 million people, 4 hours from Shanghai. Yes, I mean that same Shanghai, in China. The price is within the budget, the big blonde Swede told me with a wide smile, carefully taking a sip of the Chinese tea in front of him. And the specs are spot on, John, I replied, taking a long sip of mine. And, of course, delivery is no longer a problem. Are there any other questions, gentlemen? I asked politely to the group around us, a mix of sharp-witted Chinese production specialists, British businessmen, and the American smart guys who were actually financing the deal. It appears that we have resolved the technical issues to the satisfaction of all parties. I think we can call this a wrap, concluded Mac, the tall, lean Texan sitting next to me. I suggest we sign and get this over with. And we did it. Believe it or not, all 17 of us. What happened to your old company, Neil? Another American asked me as we waited for the last of the Chinese to sign. They're in liquidation, Henry. My new friend and banker Charles answered for me. Once John pooled our resources and Neil was here solving the Chinese's technical problems, they lost the order and their bank pulled the financing. That means a lot of workers are out of work, right? Probably not, Charles explained as I sat there with a smile on my face that even a creamed cat couldn't stop. We are supporting Neil and John in purchasing the company from the takers, and they will assemble parts made here in China. We already have it planned and 5 other factories were built. So you do the work and we Americans collect the profits, right? He joked. My bank is quite happy with its share, Charles informed him happily. And young Neil here is on his way to becoming an extremely wealthy man. So everyone is happy, the American concluded, smiling. I smiled back. There was definitely one person who wasn't happy, but after all, he'd never met that old bastard Johnson, so why did I have to ruin his day? One more drink before the girls come, John asked, looking around at me and the other American, Ted, the only ones left in the bar after we celebrated. It's late, Ted replied. They just arrived. They're coming here. Are you sure these 3 are really middle managers in this Chinese company? I asked, widening my eyes at 3 cute, graceful Chinese beauties in miniskirts walking towards us. Their long, shiny black hair fell to their shoulders, and their characteristic Chinese laughter portended many things. They looked pretty young. Don't worry about it, Neil, John assured me. I'll take the one with the big breasts, Ted chimed in. Sounds good to me. I'll go with the one with the beautiful legs, I agreed, pondering the slender beauty with the biggest eyes I've ever seen on the right, who, along with 2 others, was going to show us the sights of the city that evening and, who knows, which is even later. Well, we saw the sights and had a great time, and it's best not to go into details. John and I took over Johnson's company as planned, and I now run it and the other one we acquired. I learned that John's claims about his open relationship were absolutely true when he saw fit to even out the balance between us, and his gorgeous wife Helga agreed. We spent several very enjoyable and educational weekends together and accomplished many wonderful balancing acts between us. Why lie? Remember her, slender with beautiful legs. She is now my personal assistant in the UK, although we often take some tasks home, and it is likely that her position will soon become more permanent. My ex-wife. What's her name? Not too sure about the latest news. Met her older sister the other day, and she said Annie was finally starting to come around from her breakdown, but honestly, it didn't sound very convincing. Not my problem anymore. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.